I think the price we pay for having easy access to so much information, easy, quick access to so much information, is we sacrifice some of the depth of our engagement with that information. So the kind of jumping, hopping from bit to bit to bit, clicking on links, takes the place of what used to be a more contemplative, I think, approach to thinking about one thing, whether it's one piece of information or the argument or the narrative of a book. It becomes much harder, I think, when you're bombarded by information and other stimuli, as you are all the time on the web, to sit down and really focus on one particular thing. And so we gain kind of a breadth of engagement with information, but the cost is, I think, a certain superficiality in our relationship to that information.
You mentioned in the chapter that you sent me that sort of there's this growing sense between you and even sort of your friends that, you know, hey, I'm just not doing this. I'm finding it harder to read a book all the way through. I'm finding it harder even to pick up a book in the first place. Are you able to sort of describe that? This sort of growing, unease is the wrong word, but the sort of growing, what's going on with you, what's going on with your friends, it's just sort of seeping up on us.
Yeah. Throughout my life, books have played an important role in them, and I've always found it easy to immerse myself in a book and get engaged in an argument or a narrative. But a few years ago, as my use of the web kind of picked up, I found it much, much harder to sit down and engage with a book. After a page or two, my mind would start wandering. I'd kind of lose the focus, have to go back a page to reconnect with the argument. And at first, I thought, okay, maybe this is just general, age or something that's causing this. But what I noticed is that the sensation I had when I tried to read or really concentrate on anything was that my brain, my mind, wanted to behave the way it behaves when I'm at my computer or online. It wanted to check email. It wanted to click on links and jump from page to page. So it really, I began to make the connection that, in a really an unmistakable way, my use of the net was changing the way I think, in changing my ability to do things like concentrate or contemplate one particular piece of information or read through 100 pages of a book. And I began talking to other people, and many of them, not all of them, but many of them had a very, very similar, were suffering from a similar type of affliction. They felt that they had increasingly scatterbrained, and they wanted to be online, and they wanted to get information very, very quickly, and they didn't want to sit still and concentrate on anything.
Looking forward to that, almost a couple of questions later, but this feeds in so much into this. You mentioned that if you were to design the perfect sort of vehicle for brain distraction, it would be the internet, would be the web. Can you illuminate that? Almost tell me that and why that might be.
Yeah. The human brain, like any animal brain, is attuned to distraction. In a sense, it wants to be distracted. It wants to see what's going on in its surroundings. So, it's not it doesn't miss some source of food or isn't attacked by a tiger or something. If you look at the way the internet bombards us with stimuli, not only hyperlinks and different pages of information, but alerts, from Facebook updates to Twitter alerts to, incoming email and even our phones going off all the time. It creates, in a sense, an environment of information that plays to our desire to, or our need to be distracted. And so it becomes very difficult to keep a focus on anything when 5 different things are happening at once on your screen or between your screen and your smartphone and so forth. And it's just all sorts of environmental stimuli that come through, this information medium and keep us pretty much permanently distracted when we're online.
What is this link between possibly you, but certainly other people think about deep what's the link between those two things, and,
Yeah.
and what is the good quality of deep reading or deep thinking?
What reading did for us, in particular book reading, is it slowed us down. It took us away from our natural distractedness and forced us to focus on one thing, on a book, on a line of argument, on a line of text, linearly, often for hundreds of pages and hours on end. And that's a very different type of thinking that we're kind of naturally used to. So the book promoted a kind of in-depth engagement with ideas, a kind of very deep thinking, concentrated thinking, contemplative, introspective thinking, which in many ways is kind of a unique aspect of that particular medium, the print on page medium that we never saw before, at least not broadly, until the book became popular 500, 600 years ago.
Tell me, sort of, again, sort of staying on this theme, why people think it's a good thing to think and to think deeply. I mean, what's a good quality? Why is that a good, useful tool for humans to engage with?
Yeah. I think the great value of thinking deeply and reading deeply and concentrating in general is that we begin to develop a unique personality, a unique intellect that's ours and ours alone. And that requires, I think, deep thought and in the ability to make our own associations and our own connections about things we understand deeply inside our own mind, rather than relying on the associations and connections that might be out in the world and that we might access through hyperlinks, for instance. So I really think that the human self and the human personality becomes much richer when we can slow down and when we can think deeply and engage with information in more than just kind of a cursory manner.
What are the worries as the first generation that have only grown up online, that have only used the web? What are our big worries as they enter the workplace? Do we think we're going to see these traits?
Well, I'm a little nervous about drawing a sharp distinction between what we call, Generation Web or digital natives and older people, adults, because what I think that's that lets adults off the hook, and they can say, oh, as they always say, oh, this younger generation, they're, going to hell or whatever. And really, the effects of the internet, I think, are the same on adults as on younger kids and younger adults. And if you look at the statistics, it's people in their later 20s, 30s, 40s, 50s who are online much more of the time than, say, teenagers. So I would hate to have the focus on Generation Web, make it seem as though older people aren't affected by the internet, because I think they are. And I think what we see in young people, the distractedness, the inability to, read more than 2 pages at a time, is probably coming to characterize older people in every generation as well. Having said that, I think obviously the human brain is malleable throughout the course of anybody's life, but it's particularly malleable, of course, when you're young. So if a person is brought up looking at screens and using the web and being bombarded by information, then the question is, will the brain circuitry necessary to do things like deep reading, deep thinking, will those circuits ever even come into being? Will they be wired for that kind of thinking, or will they be wired completely for internet type of thinking, for taking in lots of information very, very quickly? And I think that's the big fear, is that we'll end up with a generation of people who are very good at using the net and very good at finding information and processing information very quickly, but don't really have any capacity for contemplativeness or for concentration or for deep engagement with information.
Again, leaping forward, but it just feels that it's nicer to do it as a conversation. Is there this big distinction, or should we be making a big distinction about information and knowledge? what the web provides is information, but what we're losing is our ability
Yeah.
to know or to process that information in a knowledgeable way.
Well, people always get into semantic discussions about what's information, what's knowledge, what's wisdom. And I think those are important discussions, but I think what the web does, what the net does, goes much deeper than that. It's not just the form of the information we're taking in, it's our ability to make sense of that information, to process that information. So I think it's at a very deep level in our brain that the more we use the web, the more we train ourselves to skip very, very quickly among many pieces of information. And we lose the ability to stop and concentrate. And so you could say that the outcome of that will have, access and ability to process huge amounts of little snippets of information, but we'll kind of begin to sacrifice the ability to create the associations ourselves among those bits of information that I think lead to true knowledge and ultimately wisdom.